升国旗，唱国歌。
If you've known Chinese history, you know that China wasn't a superpower like how it is today. In fact, for most of Chinese history, China has failed to modernize, make a good military, or even stand up to foreign powers. The ideologies of the time were not improving or changing, and stayed that way for over 1,300 years. The idea of a divine head of state that was sent from God to rule with a mandate from heaven has ruled China for a very large amount of time, with various dynasties coming in, killing the other one, claiming that their mandate had expired, and claiming themselves as a true successor of a previous dynasty who had the mandate from heaven. These governments often stayed authoritarian, with many uncanny rules and regulations, mainly due to the fact that their leaders were paranoid that the rule could come down crashing at given any moment, which is substantially true. This same paranoia and authoritarianism would plague China all the way until today, with only two non-monarchist governments in China being heavily authoritarian, which is when we come to 1911, at the fall of the Qing dynasty. The fall of the Qing dynasty had plunged China down a rabbit hole of different warlords popping up and claiming their own state in different regions of China. However, the new central government of China, unlike the others before it, wasn't a dynasty. Instead, it was a republic, led by the party of the Kuomintang, founded by Sun Yat-sen. The party's three principles of the people were nationalism, democracy, and the livelihood of the people. Keep that in mind as it becomes important later. Fast forward a couple years, and now we're in 1922. The Kuomintang had absorbed the warlords, and now the two main warring parties were the Kuomintang and the CCP. Sadly, after the two had made an agreement making a united front, Sun Yat-sen soon pissed off and died, having his young protege Chiang Kai-shek as the new leader. Regardless, Chiang's main anxiety was their alliance with the CCP, who riled the peasants up of the success of the united front. This, in Chiang's eyes, threatened the structure of China. With the warlords no longer a threat, what was the purpose of the alliance if the people they allied against had been defeated? Well, Chiang thought that there was, no use for it. After the initiated White Terror, which saw mass killings of communists in Shanghai, and soon beyond, thousands of communist peasants and trade unionists were massacred in the name of purification. A few months later after this, the CCP was facing destruction, and its leadership was at conflict with, itself? Li Lisan, inconcurrent with traditional communism, refused to retreat from the cities, as to him it was basically defeat. Now here's a name you might know. Mao Zedong liked the idea that they based themselves among the rural peasantry away from Chiang's armies, as that was how Chinese communism was meant to be. Mao's idea was to be taken despite Li being his superior, and they would centralize themselves in the Jiangxi Mountains, undergoing an insurgency against Chiang's far larger forces. In the 1930s, the Soviets took more interest in China's revolution, started helping the communists out, and sending them more supplies. But after a failed counterattack, the Russians replaced them, and Li with the 28 communist students called the 28 Bolsheviks. Did these studies make them better educated or less informalized with Chinese politics? Which is what most Chinese communists were asking. Chiang's government soon became uneasy with the people because he wasn't able to implement any of Sun's reforms, and allowed the Japanese to annex Manchuria in 1931. But then, in 1934, Chiang sent the largest army yet to flush them out, forcing Mao and the other communists to make a suicidal march through the mountains to escape, which seemed more desirable than waiting for an inevitable demise, which is called the Long March. a retreat was started to relocate the forces to the north of China in Shaanxi. However, it would take them over 10,000 kilometers through some of the most inhospitable areas of China. That's only if they managed to break the encirclement. The 28 Bolsheviks will lead the communists to do just that, but then when they got to the Jiang River, they, lost 50% of the men crossing it. Not many people gave two fucks about what those students had to say anymore. Mao would soon have to come into power in 1935 and lead the CCP to cross the remaining kilometers, having only 10% of their original rank surviving, but nevertheless, they survived. Mao's quick defensible plan to start the Revolutionary War. They would pick out peasants and set up bases. They marched across the countryside, organizing themselves as they went, using insurgent tactics to defend the bases. And of course, Mao knew Chiang would overrun them, but not before engaging in a guerrilla warfare phase. Attempting to outlast and simply survive longer, Mao could make himself a protracted war. Lastly, while this had weakened the enemy and balanced the odds between the two parties, he engaged in a conventional war to seize power. Chiang was then held hostage by his own generals, which was pretty pog. The Japanese invasion was kind of important, but it will make the video way too long. So let's just do a quick montage. Alright, that's enough cringe for one video. Back to the actual video. Okay. March 1947 saw Shaanxi be breached by the Kuomintang, and by 1948, Chiang could no longer supply Manchuria, but he refused to pull out, and refused to admit defeat, and refused to do anything about it. It would be hard for him to accept the balance of power had shifted so unfavorably for the Kuomintang, and in March, Manchuria fell. January 1949, Tianjin and Beijing fell. April, they took Nanking and Shanghai, and lastly, Guangzhou. Then, on October 1st, 1949, after the Kuomintang fled to Taiwan, in Beijing, Mao declared a new nation, the People's Republic of China. After the revolution, a series of guerrilla warfare in the West ensued, called the Kuomintang Islamic Insurgency, which Paxlock made a video on, which will be linked in the description. Mao's push to modernize resulted in a great leap forward, which resulted in him causing a famine that killed 30 million people. China's leadership under Mao was very hit and miss. For relations with the Soviets, Mao would announce them as revisionist traitors in the 1960s. However, a Chinese leader after Mao, named Deng Xiaoping, opened up Chinese economy to the rest of the world on December 18, 1978. Foreign companies and countries invested in China and resulted in rapid productivity growth. China today is undeniably an authoritarian state led by Xi Jinping. The country has seen rapid success via the largest scale capital investment and most rapid productivity growth. These factors went hand in hand and brought China onto the world stage. The entire country of China is very similar to 1978, as in schools, children are taught the superiority of the one-party state and that Xi Jinping is always watching, something that is technically true. I'm not a communist, most likely you aren't too, but even if you're not a communist, you can still say that it's very surprising and very staggering how quick China was able to develop from a nation full of farmers to the richest country globally within the span of just a few years. Maybe just a decade if we're lucky. But China isn't perfect, and I plan to go in a little bit more detail in a video that might come out before the year ends. I can't promise it since my upload schedule is kind of trash right now, but maybe you can expect it. You probably shouldn't trust me since I'm not the best person to be trusting with videos, but you can trust me if you want to. But once again, thank you for watching. Check out Paxog's video on the Kuomintang Islamic Insurgency, will once again be linked in the description. And check out Kayshan's Country Balls. Soon he'll be making a video on Ireland in about a month-ish. And I will be featured in the video, and I will be making a part 2 to his video. So check it out. And without further ado, goodbye.